Hello, my name's Nick Hillman, and I'm director of the Higher Education Policy Institute, which is an Oxford-based organisation that works with nearly all universities up and down the UK. And I'm here to deliver this presentation that is primarily aimed at Year 12 and Year 13 students, and it's going to look at what higher education is really like using our own information, our own data, and also information from other organisations. I hope the presentation will also prove useful to those who advise Year 12 and Year 13 students, such as teachers, parents, careers advisors, and anyone else. So let's kick off. I'm going to separate my presentation into three parts. First, I'm going to tell you a tiny bit about why it's me here today telling you all this stuff, and tell you about my organization and what I do. Then I'll tell you some basics about higher education, about what it's like to be a student. And then we'll drill down into some of the financial numbers, because very often when someone gets to university, it's the first time they're financially independent, and that has big and important consequences. So for those of you who haven't come across a think tank before, there are lots of think tanks across the UK, and think tanks are really groups of knowledgeable people thinking about policy. So that's what government should be doing, what other organizations should be doing to make the world a better place. They look at problems, but then they try to find solutions and ways to excuse me, tackle any problems they uncover. There are lots of think tanks in the UK. Many of them are left-wing or right-wing, closer to one political party or another. My organization is a charity, so we're not allowed to lean one way or the other. And we're specialist. Again, lots of other think tanks try to cover tons of different subjects. We only look at higher education. So someone has plotted us on this sort of map against other think tanks, and it suggests, and I hope it's true, that we're neither really left-wing nor right-wing, and also that our influence is quite high because we drill down to just one issue. Excuse me. So we, like other think tanks, are perhaps most well known for publishing lots of reports, and all our reports are freely available. So if you'd like to know more, have a look on our website, hepi.ac.uk. And some of our reports are highly relevant to people who are on their way to university. Here's three examples of that. We did a report on Gypsy Roma travellers and their communities, where educational opportunities are often lower than for other people. And we looked at what universities could do to help people from those communities reach higher education and thrive educationally. We did a report on what it's like to be a Black student in student accommodation, first report of its kind. And we found that there's more that halls of residence and other student accommodation providers can be doing to make sure that people from all sorts of backgrounds are getting a fair and excellent educational experience and student experience. And we did a report on first and family students. What's it like to be the first person in your family to go to university if your parents didn't go, or your grandparents didn't go, or maybe even your older brothers and sisters didn't go. So those are the sorts of areas we look at. And a tiny bit of background about me. Why am I the person here talking to you about these issues? Well, I've been to three different universities. I did my undergraduate degree, Manchester. I did a teacher training postgraduate qualification at Cambridge, and I did a master's course as a postgraduate student at what was then actually called Queen Mary and Westfield College, but is now called Queen Mary and is part of the University of London in the East End. I used to be a teacher, and as part of that, I ran a pre-university course of the sort that I'm covering in this video today. I worked in government. I worked for the universities minister when the current tuition fee system was implemented. And I've been working at the think tank I've told you about for about 10 years. And I'm a governor of two universities, which means I help to govern and provide oversight to two different universities, a very, very large university, the University of Manchester, and my local university in Buckinghamshire, Buckingham University. So let's get into the meat of the topic, higher education. What's it all about? The first thing to say is if you're a school leaver and you're thinking about, or a college leaver, and you're thinking about entering higher education in 2023 or 2024, you're fairly well placed because there aren't as many 18-year-olds around at the moment as there were 15 years ago, or as there are going to be in the next few years. So people who are currently in year 7 or year 8 are going to find it tougher potentially to get to university than people who are 18 now, because there are fewer 18-year-olds, as I say, in the population. It's growing. The low point was 2020. You can see here the numbers of young men and the numbers of young women. There are more young men born than young women, which is why there are more males on this chart. So you're part of a goodish generation in that respect, though obviously your education has been severely disrupted by COVID, and that puts you in a less enviable position. But it really matters how many 18-year-olds there are when you're applying to university, as these pictures show. When I started working in higher education policy in the late 2000s, there weren't anything like enough places in higher education, and people were being turned down from all the universities they're applying to. Then when the number of 18-year-olds fell very, very significantly, universities were falling over themselves to recruit students. And you can see a young lady there who's actually my next door neighbour, who had been given an unconditional offer because university was so keen to recruit her. And there are even things like free football tickets and free flights being given out in the late 2010s as universities were so keen to recruit. The number of 18-year-olds has been going up since then, but as I say, you're still part of a smaller group than in the past or in the future. But that doesn't mean that everything will necessarily run smoothly. Some universities have grown much faster than others recently, and that has produced, for example, some challenges when it comes to student accommodation. There's a couple of examples from the BBC website here where students who've got into the University of York have found they've got to live in Hull, or Glasgow students have been told there aren't enough flats available in Glasgow. So this is really one of my key messages, which is do your homework before you go. And you need to think as much about your student accommodation as you do about the course that you're choosing to do. And as soon as you know the university you're highly likely to go to, you need to start doing that research on where you're going to live, what type of accommodation you want, whether you can afford it, and so on and so forth. Let's look at why people go to higher education. University life is not right for everybody. Many people are very keen to go out and get a job or go traveling or do some voluntary work rather than go immediately from school or college to university. Many people will never go to university and will find have a very satisfying life doing other things. But those who do go to university have all sorts of advantages over those who do not. And this is all properly researched information. The little picture on the bottom right shows you the report that it comes from. These are all from proper academic studies. People who go to university are more likely to be engaged in their local communities. They're more likely to vote in elections and to be part of public debate and part of sort of community life. They're less likely to drink heavily or to smoke. So their health tends to be better. They're more likely to trust and tolerate others than people who haven't been to university. As I say, these are not my opinions. This is rooted in serious academic research. They're less likely to be unemployed. So when a recession comes round, or there aren't anything like enough jobs to go round, graduates, people with degrees, may end up unemployed, but they're less likely to end up unemployed as people without degrees. They're less likely to commit crime than people who haven't been to university. They're likely to earn more. I've put especially for women there. This is an important but not straightforward point. It's not that women graduates earn more than male graduates. On average, they don't, because sadly we have a gender pay gap in our society in general. Men on average earn more than women, but it's because women who don't go to university very often end up in quite low paid careers, retail work, caring work, which tends not to be so well paid. So it's the difference between not having a degree from university and having a degree. That difference when it comes to pay, salary, can be larger on average for women than it is for men. As I say, it's not the women end up earning more than the men. It's that the difference between being a graduate and not being a graduate can be bigger on average. It's not true for everybody, for women than for men. And you even tend to live longer, have longer life expectancy if you've been to higher education. Of course, these are all average figures. None of these things may be true for any one individual, but on average, when you compare all graduates to everyone who hasn't been to university, then there's a very strong evidence base for them. My organization is perhaps most well known for a big survey it's been doing of undergraduate students that's been running for almost 20 years, since 2006, since early 2006. And every single year, we ask over 10,000 students really detailed information about how they're getting on. And this is the only survey that has really robust, reliable year-on-year data on whether students think they're getting value for money, on how hard they're working, on what their mental health is like. And you'll find it's very regularly used by politicians and journalists and others when they're trying to consider what British universities are really like. And so what does this show? It's a huge survey, and I'm only going to give you a very small number of data points from it. But one important question we ask is, you're a student, are you happy with the course and the university you've chosen? Or you chose through your UCAS form a year or two before you arrived at university. And around 60%, so nearly 2/3, you can see here, 59% of undergraduates in the UK say, I'm happy. If I was filling in my UCAS form again, I would do the same course at the same university or the same institution, because some institutions that have higher education are not actually called universities. But 59% say they're happy. But quite a lot of others say they would change something. So they'd have a different university, maybe the same course, but a different university. 8% say they'd do a different course, maybe at the same university, but a different course. Some would say, I wish I had a gap year. Some say they'd rather have done an apprenticeship, 6%. 5% say, I wish I want to be at a different university and a different course. I want to be still in higher education, but doing something completely different. 3% say, I wish I'd gone out and just got a job. But only 2% say, I really didn't want anything to do with higher education. And I think these numbers are instructive and interesting because they show that almost no one regrets going into higher education, even if they think maybe I chose not quite the right course for me or not quite the right university for me. So most people don't regret it. But most students are also not that well prepared. Simply by watching this presentation, you'll be better prepared than some people who apply for higher education. And we say to students, how well prepared, now that you are a university, is it turning out how you expected it was going to be like? And only 11% say, yes, it's exactly what I expected it to be like. So only about 1 in 10 students say, my student experience is exactly what I thought it was going to be like. And that was also 11% even before COVID. So this isn't an effect of COVID disrupting everything. And then if you look at the 51%, the highest line on here, they say, yeah, it's been better in some ways than I expected and worse in others. So it's a sort of mixed bag. But it's been different to what I expected. And 17% say it's actually been worse than I expected. And 17% say it's been better than I expected. So this suggests to us that in general, it's working out for most people, but they could have known more and been better prepared before they went. So I hope some of the information in this presentation will help fill in that hole for you. And the sorts of things that people are wrong on are partly the costs. So we asked in another survey with a company called Unite Students, we asked a question to people who had applied to university. They've put in a UCAS form, but they haven't enrolled yet. We said to them, when you get to university, what do you think will be your biggest cost, excluding tuition fees? Excluding tuition fees. So forget the 9,250 tuition fees for a moment. Apart from those, what do you think will be your biggest cost? Now, the most popular answer was rent, but it's still, this shocked me because it's still under half of the people responding to the survey said rent. And for nearly every student, rent is going to be the answer. You know, people who've put on this question that they think course materials or nights out or student trips or joining a student society is going to be their biggest expense, almost certainly haven't thought it through properly. Unless you're going to stay living with your parents and they're not going to charge you any rent for doing that when you're at university, rent is almost certainly going to be your biggest cost. And here's the evidence for this. This is from the National Student Money Survey, a different survey, and they asked students, where is your money actually going? So you can see that on average, students say they spend £924 a month. And the biggest single expenditure by a big distance is rent. That takes up £418 of that £924 monthly spending, with the rest going on groceries and bills and going out and transport and so on and so forth. Another area where what people expect university to be like and how it actually is contact hours. So how much time you actually spend in front of an academic, a lecturer, a tutor. And when you ask applicants to university, 60% of them, the bit in green, the green box here, 60% of them say they expect to get more contact time at university than they've had at school. So more time actually being taught. But when you say to students, has that actually happened? Only 19% say yes, they are getting more contact time at university than they had at school. And those will be the medics and the nurses and the engineers and people who are on quite intensive courses, as we'll see in the next slide. And here's back to our own data with Advance-HE, the evidence for that. So this is how hard students work in a typical week during term time in different subjects. And you can see up the top there, education and teaching. So this is people who are training to be teachers. They have about 13 hours, 12 and a half hours of contact hours a week. Then they're doing about 14 hours of work on their own with their books, writing essays, doing other preparation. And then they're doing a lot of hours, 19 hours. This is maybe higher than normal because it was a COVID year and schools were making a lot of use of student teachers, but 19 hours a week work outside of the course. What that means is a placement. So they'll be in a school, for example. Look at the second subject here, subjects allied to medicine. So this is things like nursing. This is not people training to be doctors. This is things like nurses, physiotherapists, pharmacists. They're doing a similar number of hours per week, contact hours to the teachers, 13.4. 14 hours a week, 14.2 hours a week of learning on their own, and then 15 hours placements in a probably in their case in a health care environment. And then right at the bottom end of this chart, you can see there are other students who do much less work per week. For example, psychology, a very popular subject at university, 3 lines up from the bottom. They do about nearly 9 hours a week contact hours, and then nearly 14 hours a week study on their own, and very little work outside their course relevant to their course. So this is, when it says work outside their course, this is not jobs working in a bar or a shop. This is where it's actually a part of your course, a placement. So there's a huge difference in workload depending on the subject you study. You might think the students with the lowest workload, who are only doing about 20 hours a week work when you add it all up together at the very bottom of this chart, are the happiest. But actually that's not right. Our research shows when students are not doing anything like as much work as perhaps they should be doing, they can feel all at sea and at a bit of a loss. And the happiest students are actually those students who are working around 30 and a little bit over 30 hours a week. So it's not the people who are at the very top of this chart, but it's also not the people who are at the very bottom of this chart. People forget very often what a huge break it is to go away to university, especially if you come from a family where perhaps your parents didn't go to university, so they don't know so much about it. But it can be a massive break point in your life because, as I've already hinted, you will be left to your own devices a lot more when it comes to your learning. You'll be living away from home most typically. Some students stay at home, but most young full-time students straight out of school and college live away from home. It's often usually the first time you're fully financially independent. You're being split. You might have been at school with your friends right back since primary school, since infant school. You may have been with the people you're currently at school or college with for 15 years. Not in every case, but it may be in many cases. And you'll be moving away very often to a different part of the country away from them. So it will obviously be harder to keep up with your friends and family. The age at which people typically go to university is the age very often when mental health issues can first arise. Mental health is very different to physical health in the sense that the older you get, the more likely you are to have physical health problems. But mental health most commonly shows itself sort of between the mid-teens and the mid-20s. So the age at which you go to university can be very often the age at which mental health problems, issues first show themselves. Very common, of course, and universities have a lot of support services on hand to help people through those. Other health-related aspects of going to university mean you may have a good relationship with your local doctor, your local GP, your local GP surgery. You may have a health need that means you have to see them frequently or quite often. Again, when you go away to university, you'll often have a new doctor in the new town or city where you're studying, or even if you don't, you'll have to register as a temporary patient for certain support if you need it. And then people are very worried when they go to university very often because they're thinking about what will I do afterwards, and they have to start thinking about the rest of their lives and what career they're going to do. And some of these features are bigger in our country, in the UK, than they are in other countries, because to take one example, in many countries, you typically stay living at home when you go to university. You stay living in the same town or city where you grew up, stay very often living with your parents, keep the same friends from school and college. But in Britain, that's not the normal model. The normal model, the more common model, is you actually move away. And that means these issues on this slide are maybe bigger. There's a pamphlet. The picture on here is a pamphlet you can find online. It's not a happy pamphlet. It's by United Students who deliver student accommodation, but they give you some information on that shift to university that like there's lots of information available. That's one source that might be useful. We also ask in our survey, how often do you feel lonely? And we ask this survey because I meet a lot of students, and a lot of students tell me that one of the shocks about going to university is being away from their friends and family and the environment in which they've grown up. That big break point means they do sometimes feel lonely, but actually it's normal to feel lonely. And once you know that you're probably not the only student feeling like this, it can be a spur to going out, joining a club or a society, meeting new people. And it's also, I think, important to remember that if you do get to university and you take a little bit of time to find your feet, that's not uncommon. In fact, the proportion of students who say they never ever feel lonely is tiny, 4%. So almost no students never feel lonely. And it's important to recognize that the sorts of challenges people can face when they go to university are very, very common. And there are routes to try and help you through those. And I'll mention those in a moment as well. This issue is now on the media and policymakers' agenda in a way that perhaps it wasn't once, which is a good thing, because it means universities are thinking and student unions are thinking more about this issue than in the past. And the sorts of things you can do to help yourself when you get to university or before you get there I call them the ABC. The first is think a lot about your accommodation. When you get to university, you'll be spending even more time in your accommodation where you live than you will in the lecture halls. And so it's really important that you've got accommodation where it's easy to meet other people. Are there social spaces where it's easy to meet other people? Or is that going to be hard? And also make sure, work out how much rent you can afford and make sure you've got some money left over. Don't work out what's the poshest, most expensive accommodation I can just afford. Don't necessarily think that is therefore the best accommodation for you, because you need some money left over to have a social life, to buy course materials, to travel home, to do all those other things, to buy clothes. And anyway, the poshest, most expensive accommodation may very often not be the accommodation where it's easiest to meet other people. And that's what really is important, because when you look back on your university life, 20 or 30 years time, you'll think back to the friends you made there and the time you had, not only what your course was like. Another thing you can do is before you arrive, do your research for the specific course and the specific university and the specific accommodation, as I've said, that you are interested in. And that includes, for example, if you do have mental health needs, for example, telling your university that beforehand. They might be able to put a care plan in place. They might be able to put some counselling support in place. But if you don't tell them, they can't do that. And universities are very large institutions. So if you just roll up a university and expect them to find you and to know you're having challenges, it may not always work out like that. So tell them before you get there, I have these needs. If I can have this sort of support, it will really help me do better on my course, make it less likely I'll drop out. And if they can afford it and they've got the resources and it's a reasonable request, they will be up for that conversation with you. And if they're not, you might want to think about applying at another university that is more willing to give you that support. And then thirdly, think about the clubs and societies. Many people applying to university have a passion for something. It might be hockey, it might be playing the guitar, it might be writing articles for the school magazine. And think about the thing that you are passionate about and that you want to continue doing at university. Is the university you've applied to somewhere where you can do that? You know, if you're really into debating, do they have a debating society? If you're really into playing rugby, do they have a rugby a team or more than one rugby team? If you're really into journalism and you want to be a journalist, do they have a student newspaper? Again, You might still want to go there even if the answer is no, but it's something worth thinking about, because if you want to spend a lot of your time at university mingling with the other people who play cricket, they need to have a cricket team. So it's important to make sure the university has your non-academic needs in mind and can satisfy them as well as your academic needs. I was struck by this tweet from a teacher who works with people applying to university. And the title of this slide, I know a few of the letters have got missed off by the little picture of me talking, says, if you go for the most expensive room you can afford, you won't have money left for anything else. And I was struck by this tweet because for a lot of people applying to university think it's absolutely, vitally, critically important they have their own ensuite bathroom. And if that's really important to you and you can afford it, go for it. But just remember, you'll be paying extra money for that ensuite room. And it will mean your bedroom's probably smaller as a result as well, because it takes up some of the space. And just remember that you probably don't have your own ensuite bathroom at home. So is it absolutely critically important you have one at university? If it is, great. If it isn't, maybe you can save a bit of money and have a better social life on the side. These are the sorts of issues that there is no right or wrong, but each person individually has to come to a decision on. And so this teacher warns their pupils that they point out that they share a kitchen and a bathroom at home with other people. So is it really essential to have your own bathroom and your own kitchen at university? For some people it will be, for others it won't be. So financial stuff in the final section of my remarks. You will be paying, assuming you're going to university in England, because this is really a presentation mainly about England, £9,250 a year for your fees. That is a lot of money. That is a lot more money than the government pays a school or a college to get you through your A-levels or your BTECs or whatever you're doing. It's a lot of money, but there's a lot of things the universities have to pay for. And on this chart, you can see more or less how a typical university splits the money up. So nearly £4,000 of it goes on teaching and research, the lecturers, for example, the technicians in the labs, things like that. Another nearly £2,000 goes on the estates and facilities. Might sound a lot of money for keeping a few buildings going, but universities are full of some fantastic buildings, laboratories, engineering facilities, libraries, and they come with large costs. A typical university is very, very much bigger than a typical school, often with tens of thousands of students. There's then a significant portion of your fee will go on administration. Again, that might sound dull and boring, but it's important stuff that means the institution runs smoothly. Make sure your degrees are good quality, for example, and that if you're training to be a pharmacist, then the pharmacy industry respects the degree that you're doing. And you can see the rest of the money is split up in different ways. It's not worth spending a single moment worrying about your tuition fee, in my opinion. Other people may tell you different things. But the reason I say that is the government will give you a loan to pay every single penny of that fee. And you don't have to pay any of it back until after you've graduated and after you're earning a decent slug of money in the labour market. So currently it's 9% of your income above £25,000 a year. It's going to be more or less. So when you're in the labour market, you've got to be earning at least that sort of sum of money before you pay back a single penny of this money. So it really isn't worth worrying about. And if you never earn enough to pay it off, eventually, it's a long time, many decades in the future, but the government will write it off for you. So it really isn't worth worrying about it. It may still mean that you don't want to go to university for other reasons, but it's not worth. Do not go to university because you're worried about the fees. The fees are faced by every student, and there's an income contingent loan scheme backed by government to pay for it. What students, if you talk to people who are already at university, are more worried about is living costs, because they've got to pay all those things I talked about earlier: rent and clothes and travel and books and the odd night out. But again, the government will support you with this. So if you're a student that doesn't live with your parents, so you've moved out of your home, your parents or your guardians where you grew up, and you're not living in London, you get a bit of extra money if you're living in London because it's so expensive. But let's say you move from Oxfordshire to Manchester, which is what I did when I was 18. Well, now you will have a loan, a maintenance loan from the government that's worth up to nearly £10,000. So it's worth up to £9,706 this year, £9,978 in 2023. That's a lot of money. Sounds like a lot of money, though it's less than £1,000 a month. And it doesn't all come from government. And the government will only give you, again, as a loan, so you have to pay it back eventually if you get in well-paid work, will only give you the full amount, £9,706 in 2022-3, if your household where you currently live, your parents or your guardians or the people you currently live with, earn less than £25,000 a year. And that's both your parents, for example, together, if they're living together. But if your parents or the household in which you live, their income is less than £25,000 a year, the government will lend you the full amount, £9,706. If your parents or whoever you live with have an income that's higher than that, the government will expect your parents to fill in the gap. So if your parents on a really healthy salary of above about £60,000, as you can see here, the government will only allow you to borrow about £4,500, £4,523, and they'll expect your parents to make up the gap. And that's over £5,000 a year. That is a lot of money for your parents to find. So I would advise you to go home after this presentation and have that conversation with them so that they can start preparing for that. I'm not showing you this chart to scare you or to disrupt the relationship you have with your parents. I'm showing you this chart because your parents need to know, or your guardians or whoever you live with need to know, that the government expects them to help support you financially unless they're on fairly low incomes. And I think that's a very important point among all the others in this presentation. Certainly the journalists and the newspapers think it's important, and that's how they've written it. It's a hidden nasty. Martin Lewis, the money saving expert guy who's on the telly and got a website, he's got some very useful information on his website about this information that your parents or whoever you live with may wish to read. Nearly finished, but I just want to tell you a couple of other things before I go. The first is not every course has anything like the same outcomes. So, for example, if you only care about money, and I don't suggest that's a sensible way to choose your course or your university, but if the only thing you care about is money, then you're best off doing economics. The green dots here show you how much people with different subjects earn by their late 20s. And the top here you can see is economics. Medics earn a lot, doctors earn a lot, people with maths degrees earn a lot, and then there's a drop down to law. But everybody where there's a green dot that's above the dotted blue line is earning more than if they didn't go to university. There are a very few number of areas where people who go to university end up earning less than people who don't go to university. And they're things like the creative arts, but people tend not to go into creative arts to earn lots of money. They tend to go into creative arts for the love of it. A few of them will earn lots of money, but on average they don't. So if you only care about money, these numbers are for men. I'll show you a related chart for women in a moment. Then those are the subjects you should do, but I don't actually recommend that's how you make your decision. It's also worth remembering that not all universities are the same. And this chart, which are numbers only for women, show that, again, LSE, the London School of Economics, actually has the highest what's called graduate earnings premium. So people who've been to the London School of Economics earn more than people who've been to any other university on average. Imperial's up there as well. Imperial is in London, does lots of science and engineering type courses. Oxford and Cambridge will be up there too. Other universities, typically people who've been there don't earn so much. But as I say, I don't recommend you make your decision about how much you earn, but I show you these charts for another reason, to remind you that there is a wealth of information available that just didn't exist when I went to university on the outcomes and the what it's like to be a student on different courses and different universities. And if you only take one thing away from my presentation today, I hope it's this, which is do your homework, because you're going to spend the next 3 years of your life potentially at university, and you can either have a really good time, as most students do, or you can spend 3 years wishing you'd done something else. And the more you do your homework now, the better the chances of the former happening are. So this is my final slide. And I just want to recap on some of the things I've said. First of all, don't live at home unless you're absolutely certain that that is the right choice for you, because part of the fun of going to university very often is moving away, meeting new people, living in a different part of the country, and having an experience that's just completely different to the first couple of decades of your life. I haven't talked much about London. London is a great place to be a student because it's such a big city and there's so much going on. And there's lots of really, really top-notch universities and other higher education institutions in London. It's also a very expensive place to live. You get a bit more money from the government to live there, but think deeply. If London's on your list, do your homework. Do your homework. It absolutely is the right place for very many people to study at. Institutions and courses are very different from one another, as I've suggested in the green on the second line there. So do your homework. Find student societies that match your interests. As I said, if you love rugby, make sure there's a rugby team. If you love hockey, make sure there's a hockey team. Think as much about your accommodation as your course and your university, because that's where you'll be spending a lot of your time. Avoid, I haven't talked much about this, but lots of students feel they have to take on part-time work alongside their studies to help pay for their living costs. That's fine. It's hard if you're a medic or an engineer or a vet, because you won't have many spare hours. But on many courses, that's fine. But if you do a few hours work in a pub or a shop or somewhere else, actually your academic studies won't suffer. They may even do better. Some people have a job on the side, do even better because their weeks are a bit more organized. But students who do lots of work on the side, their academic results suffer. Sometimes they drop out. They feel they can't balance the job and the study. So my firm advice would be avoid doing more than 10 or 12 hours of paid work a week on top of your course. Make sure your parents know what they're meant to contribute, because most parents are expected to contribute. Being lonely sometimes is normal, but as I said, if you tell your university before you get there about any special needs you have, they will try to help. And then the top right, I've minimized the picture of me so you can read that one. Student loans are not like other debts, so don't worry them. University may not be the right place for you, but don't decide not to go just because the fees cost a lot of money, or you don't know how you're going to pay for your living costs, because help is at hand, both from the government in terms of the student loans, and as I say, hopefully from your parents, and also sometimes from the university as well. When people face really deep troubles, there are hardship funds and other things the universities can do to help. And then very, 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 very finally, follow your heart. Lots of people, you'll get lots of advice from lots of people of the sort that I've given you. But in the end, you need to be doing something, in my opinion, just my opinion, that is your passion, that you're going to be happy. Going to university and getting your degree sets you up for the rest of your life, and you want to be well set up for the rest of your life. And if it goes wrong, students do drop out, they change their mind, they move course, they drop out and re-enroll at a different university a year later. There are options to change your mind. So don't do what you want to do and see how it goes, would be my final message. Thank you very much for listening. If you found this useful or it's been missing information that you would like to have heard, do please let us know. The HEPI website is hepi.ac.uk. My email address is on there, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Thank you very much.